The Alzheimer's Association is the brains behind saving yours. As the third largest funder in the world of Alzheimer's disease research and the largest volunteer organization dedicated to Alzheimer's disease, KAAM and the Alzheimer's Association team up to bring you Attacking Alzheimer's with the Alzheimer's Association, a weekly 28-minute show featuring great minds to shed some light on this devastating disease that affects so many. And now, here's your host, Julie DeHarty.
Welcome to Attacking Alzheimer's with the Alzheimer's Association on KAAM. I'm Julie DeHarty, and today our guest again is Veronica Shanklin, board volunteer for the Alzheimer's Association, and we are going to talk about research and advocacy in finding a cure. And remember, the helpline is always open at the Alzheimer's Association. Their number is 1-800-272-3900. And just to tell you a little bit about the Alzheimer's Association, they are the world's leading voluntary health organization in Alzheimer's care, support, and research. They're the third largest funder of Alzheimer's research, only behind the governments of the United States and China. So they do a lot for this disease, and they have a huge mission. That is to eliminate Alzheimer's disease through the advancement of research to provide and enhance care and support for everybody that's affected by this and reduce the risk of dementia through the promotion of brain health. And they've got a huge vision, which is a world without Alzheimer's, which would be nice for everyone involved. So we're going to talk to Veronica Shanklin. We talked to her last week, and she's an accomplished marketing professional. She has over 10 years experience in branding, communications, and event management. After 10 years in Chicago, Veronica relocated back here to her hometown of Dallas, and that was to take care of her mother and her grandmother, both living with Alzheimer's disease. As a full-time caregiver, marketing consultant, and blogger, Veronica is really passionate, as you can tell, about Alzheimer's awareness and advocacy. She currently serves on the Greater Dallas chapter of the Alzheimer's Association Board of Directors, Your Brain Matters Women's Initiative Leadership Committee, and the Longest Day Task Force. Veronica also volunteers in the local office and at events throughout the year. She attended, and this is really cool, the Alzheimer's Advocacy Forum in Washington, D.C., where she met with legislative representatives to advocate for increased research, funding, and legislative support for Alzheimer's disease. So I want to say welcome, Veronica.
Thank you.
And last week, we talked about all of the care and support programs that are available through the Alzheimer's Association. So today, let's talk about current treatments and then what needs to happen so that there's finally a cure for the disease. So let's start with treatment. Are there treatments actually for Alzheimer's disease?
So currently there is not a treatment to stop, slow, or prevent Alzheimer's disease, and there is a worldwide quest to find one. Because new drugs take years to produce from concept to market. They start off in a lab, and then they go with smaller animals, larger animals, then the humans. That whole process takes years. So we're working at all times to find new drugs and new treatments that can be used to treat Alzheimer's. Current drugs help mask the symptoms of Alzheimer's, but they don't treat the underlying disease or delay its progression.
So it's never going to go away at this point.
Today, right now.
That's our hope.
Right, exactly. But hopefully it will at some point.
So there's currently medications for Alzheimer's disease. What kind of medications are there?
So there are currently 5 FDA-approved Alzheimer's drugs that treat the symptoms of Alzheimer's. They temporarily help memory and thinking problems in about half the people who take them, but these medications don't treat the underlying causes of Alzheimer's, and they don't cure Alzheimer's disease. So they're not altering your brain cells, they're not restoring the brain, which is slowly, deteriorating. These drugs don't do that. They simply help with memory and thinking problems.
So how do they know what drug goes to what person? Is it kind of trial and error?
You know what? I would actually, since I'm not a doctor,
okay,
I would actually just tell people to talk to their doctor, and the doctor will recommend what drug they should use. And as we know, or as we may not know, all patients are different. So it's hard to say what drug should go to which patient without knowing their situation.
Yeah, it might not work for another. So what was it like when you went to Washington, D.C.?
I went to Washington, D.C. earlier this year for the Alzheimer's Association Advocacy Forum, and it was just a wonderful experience. I encourage anyone who's passionate about this cause to get in touch with the Alzheimer's Association and see about going and representing their area. We were trained on the current legislation that's before our representatives, and we were trained on what it is that we were looking for and what we needed to ask, what the ask was. And the ask was for them to support increased funding for Alzheimer's research. So we did all-day training on that, and then the next day we actually went to Capitol Hill and went to the offices of our representatives and our congresspersons, and spoke to them and told them our stories and told them how important it is and how important it is they support this legislation for the future and for our current families.
So was this a group of people from the Alzheimer's Association that you went with?
No, it's actually, I think it was almost 1,000 ambassadors from across the country, and they're just regular people. I'm just a regular caregiver. Anyone can go.
How did you get chosen for that?
I asked if I could go.
You
I
asked
found out about it,
go.
and I said, this is something I'm really passionate about. Is this something? So I went to my local chapter, Alzheimer's Association, to find out how I could get involved.
Well, thank you for that.
You're welcome. It was such an amazing experience, and I encourage anyone who can to try to go and participate in that.
Right. So anybody can volunteer that's passionate like you are about it.
Yes.
That's awesome. So what about other studies or treatments? Is there anything else that's happening out there?
So in addition to investigating experimental drugs, many clinical trials are in progress, and they include various brain imaging studies and testing of blood or spinal fluid. So we hope that one day these techniques will provide methods to diagnose Alzheimer's disease in its earliest, most treatable stages, possibly even before symptoms appear.
So, you're very passionate about this. Tell everybody your story about, you have your mom and your grandmother,
right,
and you lived in Chicago.
Right.
So how did that all come to be? How did you even figure out that you were having problems?
So I lived in Chicago for 10 years. I'm originally from Dallas, and I lived in Chicago for 10 years. And I was coming home for visits and kind of progressively seeing things that were in disarray, for lack of a better word. My mom was having trouble at work. My mom was taking care of my grandmother solo. They were losing weight, just business affairs around the house, and things weren't being taken care of. So these red flags kind of started to add up, and then at some point I decided I needed to come and step in and help out, and that's when we figured out where we were, and that we have 2 Alzheimer's diagnoses.
So once you figured out they both had Alzheimer's, how did you figure out there really wasn't, that you needed more investigating and more experimenting and you needed more treatments, and how did that come to be?
So I'm kind of a natural researcher.
Mm-hmm.
Just even before this, I always go to the internet for everything. And so while there is a lot of information on the internet, it's not necessarily guided. You're just kind of getting stuff here and there. So that's when I found the Alzheimer's Association. And because I left my job in Chicago and I came home, I wasn't working at the time, and I had some free time on my hands. So I just walked into the Alzheimer's Association and asked if they needed any volunteer help. And I started off as just helping out with administrative things, and kind of just progressively started helping more and getting more involved and meeting the people in the office and learning about events and conferences that they had, and just becoming more involved. And so
knowledge is power, especially when it comes to Alzheimer's.
Absolutely, because as a caregiver, you're thrown into something that you likely have no idea about, caregiving and Alzheimer's. So the two together, you need as much help as you can. And I encourage people to find as many resources. The Alzheimer's Association is a great resource to lead you to other resources.
And you can always call the helpline. It's 1-800-272-3900. So I guess it takes a lot of money and a lot of people for research. Can anybody participate in the research?
Absolutely. Research is so important because that's the only way that we're going to find a cure. It's very important that people get involved in research. If someone is interested in participating in research, the Alzheimer's Association has a tool called Trial Match, and it's an online database basically of so many different trials that you can participate in. And you go in, you enter your information, basically kind of your demographic information and details about your life, and it'll match you up with different trials that you might qualify for. There's trials for those who have a diagnosis. There's trials for caregivers, simply for someone who just wants to help. A lack of volunteers for Alzheimer's trial is one of the greatest obstacles slowing the progress of potential new treatments.
And what kind of things can you do to volunteer? Do they need anything from office work to taking care of caregivers or their loved ones?
Anything from office work, events. We have lots of events and conferences where you can come help out and help plan for events. We have a speakers bureau where you can be trained on different topics, and you can go out into your community and speak to your community about Alzheimer's. Just a number of opportunities. And like you said, that helpline, 1-800-272-3900 is the best place to call to get the wealth of information.
If you wanted to be, say, a volunteer that took care of, say, okay, so you have your mom and you have your grandmother. What if I wanted to help you out and come take care of those people? I need some sort of overview. I need to be told what to do.
Come on out and take care of them.
But do they have some sort of courses like that at the Alzheimer's? I mean, that teach people?
Yes, there are tons of caregiving courses. We have a Caregivers Day Out where you can come and on both sides. So there's one side of it where if you're a caregiver, you can bring your loved one and know that they'll be taken care of by quality, people who will help with them while you go out and run errands or do whatever you need to do. If you want to help out on the other end and be a volunteer to help out with Caregivers Day Out and help take care of someone, then you can do that too. But it's all supervised. It's all it's training. We do not offer one-on-one in-home care. Okay. But we do offer other services.
But that's maybe something that could happen in the future as we learn more about Alzheimer's. I'm sure it's a need.
Raise funds, and that might be something that could come from that.
Well, it's all about money for research, and it all sounds very expensive. So where does the money actually come from to support the research? Is that part of what you did in Washington, D.C.?
Absolutely. There are different sources for funding for research. One of them is the Alzheimer's Association, of course. I think, as you mentioned earlier, the Alzheimer's Association is one of the biggest funders of research for Alzheimer's. There's also the NIH, which is the National Institutes of Health, which is the government funding for Alzheimer's. So the reason that I just want to talk about numbers for a second.
Okay.
So Alzheimer's is the most expensive disease in America. In 2015, the direct cost to American society for caring for those with Alzheimer's totaled an estimated $226 billion, and half of those costs were borne by Medicare. $226 billion, that's a lot. 1 in 5 Medicare dollars is spent on a person with Alzheimer's. Do you know how many other diseases and how many other treatments and whatnot are in the world that 1 in 5 Medicare dollars is spent on Alzheimer's? So I guess my point is just that this is a very expensive disease and it's costing the government a lot of money.
And if we don't find a cure, it's just going to keep costing more and more and more.
Exactly.
So it could, the costs are just going to continue to go up. And you're right, we need to find a cure. So, we said, how is the research paid for? You had some exciting news that we just learned of that had to do with research.
Right. So when I talked about going to D.C. and talking to our representatives, and one of the things that we talked about was increasing funding for Alzheimer's research. So we are happy to report that just in the last couple of days, the House and Senate leaders announced their intention for the 2016 federal government funding bill, to include the largest increase in history for Alzheimer's research funding, bringing the total of Alzheimer's research at the National Institutes of Health to nearly $1 billion per year. The interesting thing about that is a wonderful increase, and that is great, and that is historic, and we have never had that much funding for Alzheimer's. But when you look across the board at the funding for other diseases, the numbers are so much higher. And I am not one to sit here and try to compare that this needs more money or this doesn't need more money. But when you look at diseases like cancer and HIV, heart disease, you see progress. You see lots of progress. You see fewer people dying from HIV. You see treatment for cancer. Mm-hmm. That's because we threw a lot of money at it, just to put it plainly. Alzheimer's has not had this investment of money that these other diseases have had. And so it's time that we focus on Alzheimer's, continue to focus on the other diseases. Like I said, it's not a competition. But if we put a little more effort into Alzheimer's, which is growing at astronomical rates, perhaps we'll be able to find treatment and cures for Alzheimer's as well.
Yeah, and so where does all the funding just come from for the Alzheimer's Association, come from the government, and then these fundraisers that they do, like the walk?
Absolutely. So you have the National Institutes of Health, which is the government funding. You have the Alzheimer's Association, which also raises funds, and that's through the walk. That's through fundraising throughout the year. That's through events across the country. We have another event called the Longest Day, which is also a fundraiser that we do during the summer that people can participate in. And it's a kind of a fun event where you do an activity for the longest day. I believe it's on the summer solstice, and you do anything from there are people who play bridge all day. There are people who, all kinds of things. I had a party and we played bidwiz and spades all day, and I had my friends come and make donations throughout the day. And then the other is sponsors and corporations. Those are the other resources that we have for funding.
So those are things that other people can do outside of the association if they just want to help out. I had another question I wanted to ask you because you have 2 people in your home with Alzheimer's, and we were talking about research. Do you do a journal or anything like that, or is that something that people could do to help in research?
Actually, probably in some of these trials, in some of these,
right.
they ask you to do those types of things. I do my own personal journaling just because I like to journal. And like I said, I blog about my caregiving experience just for myself. And then speaking of journals, my mother, being in early stages and having short-term memory loss, I downloaded an app on her phone, a journal app. So when we go places, when we get home, or maybe even while we're there, she'll jot down what we did, just because at the end of the week, she might not remember that we went to the movies and we went to a Christmas party. But she can go back and look through her journal online, and it's just something that she has with her all the time. So that's a great tool that I'd like to recommend to people.
So is there help for patients and families after they're diagnosed?
Absolutely. The Alzheimer's Association, I know I keep going back to that, but the Alzheimer's
Association,
huge. Right, exactly, is a great help that I've benefited from after, we got our diagnosis, just with resources and everything from, I have a senior companion that comes in and sits with my grandmother for me. I've gotten supplies from area agencies. Actually, my mother, I was able to get a will done for my mother from one of the resources that I got from the Alzheimer's Association, a will for free from a local attorney who offers those services. So tons of opportunity to get help.
And I know that, even the last time we spoke, we talked about getting an early and a proper diagnosis and the first steps. And it's really important to get good medical care and to get them in if you find something wrong. And we talked about how you were noticing. What are some of the things you noticed from your mom and your grandmother when you thought when you said, I knew there was something wrong? What kind of things were wrong?
Definitely, when you have someone who is responsible for all of the bills and all of the business affairs in a house, that's one thing that you look at, like, from the beginning. Those things start to slip because you kind of have to stay on top of it to take care of those things. And when you're not on top of it, you miss bills, you miss, notices that come in the mail. So that's definitely one thing to look at. The other thing that with them was their diet. They weren't eating properly and they weren't eating enough. So of course, I wasn't there, 24/7 to know if they were just skipping meals, but I know they were eating a lot of TV dinners, and it's because it's the easiest thing to do. So it's easy to pop a, budget TV dinner in the,
right.
because you want to avoid cooking because it's complicated and it's a lot of steps, and it's just easier just to do that. So, those are 2 things. And then also paying attention to driving and getting lost. That's also something to, my grandmother started getting lost. And I remember one time we got a phone call from a stranger who said, I'm here with your mother and she doesn't know, where she's trying to go, and it just happened to be an angel, because the fear of that is
that's scary.
Right. The fear is that some person who wants to take advantage of them stops them, so these are things why I'm all about an early diagnosis, to know and to get ahead of these things before you're on the defense and, trying to fix a problem.
When you took your mother and your grandmother in and they were, what kind of things did they do to diagnose them? What kind of testing did they do?
So that's an interesting story. My mother, we started off at her primary care physician, which is what you would usually do. And I, explained to her what was going on, and she referred us to a neurologist. We went to the neurologist and we started with just an in-office mini memory exam. And that's just a really basic exam. It didn't take much time, and they ask you maybe remember these 3 items, and it might be pen, car, apple.
Okay.
So then pen, car, apple, remember these 3 items. And then he went on to ask other questions. What's today? Who's the president? And just some basic questions like that. Write the numbers on a clock backwards. I can't remember all the questions. I definitely can, find those questions online. But we did that mini mental exam. They did blood work. They do a lot of things to rule out other problems. So you want to make sure that it's not a thyroid problem, or it's not menopause, depression, hormonal issues. It could be so many other things, which is why it's important to go to a doctor. So we went to the neurologist and went through that testing. And then eventually we ended up going to a neuropsychologist, and we did an all-day battery of tests, which I highly recommend for someone in early stages, to find out what parts of the brain are being affected. So is it short-term memory? Is it executive decision-making? Is it reflexes? The brain is such a complicated thing that some things might be affected where other things are not. So it's just important to get to a medical professional and get started on that, and then you're able to, react and, move forward appropriately.
All of that had to be so overwhelming for you because you had a full-time job and a full-time life of your own in Chicago, and you come back and here's what you find. So how does Veronica take care of Veronica? Mm-hmm. How did you work through that?
So I think, I don't know. I mean, I think it's just, part of it is just me and my personality. And I know that if I'm not active and out and about and just like getting involved with the Alzheimer's Association, I was like, I need to do something. I have to get out the house and do something. I know if I'm not there, then I'm not my best self, and I'm not able to take care of them. And even like at some point, maybe I will have some down days. And I know that I'm laying in the bed like, okay, you got to
overwhelmed.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, okay, you got to get up and do, you know what I mean? So then I need to treat myself to an outing. And the other thing is, even with my mom, she doesn't have the most active social life. Mm-hmm. So I also have to make sure that I'm keeping her active, like we went to the movies yesterday, or at least once, or there has to be some balance to at least once or twice a week, making sure that she has some fun, Then also making sure that I have fun, because there's this whole caregiver guilt thing where, I went out on a Friday night and had a good time, and I'm like, okay, I have to find something for my mom to do because she hasn't been out all weekend. And, so it really is kind of just a juggling game. It's really kind of, that's what it is. It's juggling the balls and just.
And knowing the people, because they probably have good days and bad days. So
right.
You're not going to try to take them out of the house on a bad day.
Right.
And so whatever you had planned, maybe the movie
right.
isn't going to work today. You might have to try it again tomorrow.
Absolutely. And being flexible.
So there's a lot of patience involved there. And that's where the Alzheimer's Association comes in. If you have questions about any of this stuff or help with any of this stuff, you can call that number, 1-800-272-3900. And the website... do we have the website? It's alz.org/Greater Dallas. They have so many different programs, and you have a mind share coming up. What's that?
A mind share is where we have professionals come in and give a workshop, or it's a series that we have basically, and professionals come in and give a workshop on different topics. We have one coming up on March 18th that's to learn how to avoid fraud. And oh my gosh, is that a topic that I'm dealing with in my house right now?
Wow.
Because
well, all of us want to avoid fraud,
right,
but
absolutely.
I suppose.
But when you have someone who you've told over and over that it's fraud, they're not real, and they are convinced that they're going to win Publishers Clearinghouse.
Right. You don't give these people $25,000 to get $1 million back.
Exactly. And they are relentless. Like, I'm in a situation right now where I'm really trying to get to the bottom of this, because it's just horrible how people take advantage of others. So this Mindshare, we'll talk about how to learn to avoid fraud.
Oh, that's great information. And you also deal with Your Brain Matters. Can you tell us what Your Brain Matters is?
Sure. Your Brain Matters is our women's initiative where we are on a mission at the Alzheimer's Association to educate women and the community about Alzheimer's. We kicked off this initiative in this fall, and to this date, we've provided information to 13,000 people across the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And so basically, we're giving information about knowing the 10 signs, which is the warning signs for Alzheimer's. Mm-hmm. We're talking about just general information about the disease and making sure that people are proactive about getting early diagnosis.
And why is it for women? Why is it so important to have women active here?
Because women make up 2/3 of people diagnosed with Alzheimer's are women. Not to mention most caregivers are also women. So women are a huge population that are affected by this disease that we're focusing on right now.
And I told you I was in the Walk for Alzheimer's, and they have the one for next year already set up. It's going to be October 1st, and it's at Reunion Tower. And last year they raised $1.2 million, and we want to do way better. So everybody get out there, mark your calendars, get your teams together. It's a lot of fun because this year, I don't know if you were there, but they had, they had the little flowers that were spinners, and there was a different color. I don't remember what the different colors for. Do you?
The flowers are part of our Promise Garden, and it's something that we do at every walk, and the flowers represent how you're affected by Alzheimer's. So we have a flower for if you have Alzheimer's, a flower for a caregiver, a flower if you have someone in your family who passed from Alzheimer's, and then a flower for if you're just a supporter of the cause. So we pass out the flowers at the event, and then it's just this beautiful array of color.
It was. I loved it. And another great thing I noticed is that there were Alzheimer's patients there with, say like you took
blue flowers.
So the blue flowers were for people who actually are suffering with Alzheimer's.
My mom participated this year and last year.
Wow.
So,
And there was so many people there, but it was so great to see all of those people come together for this cause. And we need, all the money we can get. And thank you so much for going to Washington, D.C.
Absolutely. And I'm going again in
You
2016.
Are?
Yeah. It was such a great experience.
That is awesome. So thank you for joining us today, Veronica. Your knowledge is so important, and so is your work. So thank you for all of that. This has been Attacking Alzheimer's with the Alzheimer's Association. I'm Julie DeHarty on 770 KAAM.
This has been Attacking Alzheimer's with the Alzheimer's Association. Thank you for listening, and please join us again next week at the same time for another deep dive topic surrounding the journey with Alzheimer's disease.